Beneath Vermont's rolling hills and ancient forests, where morning mist clings to weathered stone and shadows stretch longer than they should, something waits in the silence. Hidden chambers carved from bedrock. People who walked into the woods and never returned. Stone circles resting on lake beds where no civilization should have reached. From hidden chambers to vanished travelers, Vermont's past blurs into something stranger than history. The first mystery lies scattered across the Green Mountain State like pieces of a puzzle no one remembers making. You'll find them tucked into hillsides, half buried under centuries of fallen leaves, or standing quietly at the edge of forgotten meadows. These are Vermont's stone chambers, and they shouldn't exist. Drive the back roads of Royalton or Woodstock on a crisp October morning when the maples blaze red against granite outcroppings, and you might spot one. A low opening in the hillside framed by massive stone slabs that seem too precisely placed to be natural. The air around these sites carries a different quality, thicker somehow, as if it's been holding its breath for centuries. You hear nothing but wind threading through maples and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. Step closer, and the craftsmanship becomes undeniable. These aren't random piles of field stone cleared by colonial farmers. The chambers are built with megalithic precision, using stones that weigh several tons each. The walls rise in carefully corbelled arches fitted without mortar, yet standing solid after centuries of New England winters. Some stretch back 20 ft into the hillside, others open into multiple rooms connected by narrow passages. The largest can hold a dozen people standing upright. Inside, the temperature drops noticeably. Your footsteps echo in the stone space, and flashlight beams reveal walls blackened by what might be ancient smoke. The floors are often paved with flat stones worn smooth by countless feet. In some chambers, you'll find stone shelves carved into the walls or circular depressions that could have held offerings, storage, or fires. The construction is so sophisticated that modern engineers study them to understand how they've remained stable without steel reinforcement or concrete foundations. Mainstream archaeology offers a straightforward explanation. These are colonial root cellars, built by early European settlers between the 1600s and 1700s. Farmers needed places to store vegetables, dairy products, and preserved foods through harsh Vermont winters. The massive stones provided insulation, and the underground construction kept temperatures stable year-round. Many chambers show evidence of later use for this purpose, with wooden shelving remains and pottery fragments from the colonial period. But the story becomes complicated when you examine the details that don't fit the root cellar theory. Why would practical farmers invest enormous effort to move multi-ton stones when simple wooden structures would serve the same purpose? Why are so many chambers positioned on hilltops or ridgelines where hauling heavy stones would be most difficult? And why dozens of these structures align with astronomical events in ways that seem far too precise to be coincidental? At the equinoxes, sunlight streams through chamber doorways and illuminates specific points on back walls. During winter solstice, some chambers frame the rising sun with surgical precision. These alignments match those found at ceremonial sites across Europe and the Americas, suggesting knowledge of astronomy and sacred geometry that goes beyond food storage. Local surveyors have documented chambers that align with distant peaks, creating sight lines that stretch for miles across the Vermont landscape. Native American oral traditions add another layer to the mystery. The Abenaki people, who inhabited Vermont for thousands of years before European contact, speak of stone places in the mountains where their ancestors conducted ceremonies and marked the turning of seasons. Some elders describe these sites as places where the earth's energy was strongest, natural intersections of spiritual force. The chambers, they say, were built where the land itself spoke to those who knew how to listen. Archaeological evidence supports continuous use of these sites across different cultures. Stone tools, pottery fragments and fire-cracked rocks found in and around the chambers span millennia from Paleo-Indian periods through colonial times. This suggests the locations held significance long before European arrival, possibly serving as focal points for seasonal gatherings, astronomical observations, or spiritual practices that required permanent stone markers. The most intriguing theory comes from researchers who believe some chambers predate both colonial settlement and known Native American construction techniques in the region. They point to similarities with Neolithic structures in Ireland, Scotland, and Portugal. The cobalt arch construction, the astronomical alignments, the use of massive stones without mortar, all echo building traditions from the ancient Atlantic world. Could these be evidence of pre-Columbian contact built by visitors who crossed the ocean centuries before recorded history acknowledges such journeys? This theory remains highly controversial, with most archaeologists citing the lack of definitive artifacts or dating evidence. The chamber's stones resist standard dating techniques, and centuries of use by different cultures have created archaeological layers that are difficult to separate and interpret. Without clear proof of extreme antiquity, the pre-Columbian hypothesis stays in the realm of speculation, though it continues to attract researchers drawn to the chamber's undeniable sophistication. Standing inside one of these mysterious structures on a winter afternoon when low sunlight cuts through the doorway and strikes the back wall with laser precision, the academic debates fade into background noise. The chamber comes alive in that moment, revealing its purpose through direct experience rather than scholarly theory. Light becomes architecture, and time collapses into a single golden beam that connects the present to whatever ancient hands shaped this place. If these were just root cellars, why do they align with the solstice sun? And if they were more than storage, what knowledge guided their builders to create something so enduring, so precisely placed, so mysteriously purposeful? The answer may lie deeper in Vermont's landscape, where stone gives way to forest and the mountains themselves begin to whisper older secrets. Deep in Vermont's northeast kingdom, where the Connecticut River curves through valleys that haven't changed their character in centuries, the forest holds its own mysteries. Here, among the dense groves of maple and birch, something happened that science still can't explain. Between 1945 and 1950, in an area locals began calling the Bennington Triangle, people simply vanished. The disappearances weren't random. They clustered around Glastonbury Mountain, a hulking peak that rises from the forest like a green fortress. The mountain has always felt different to those who know it. Native tribes avoided its upper reaches, calling it a place where the four winds meet, where spirits gather and the boundaries between worlds grow thin. Early settlers noticed it too. Animals acted strangely near the summit. Compasses spun without reason. The silence could become so complete it felt oppressive, broken only by sounds that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The first to disappear was Midi Rivers, an experienced hunting guide who knew these woods better than most people know their own neighborhoods. On November 12, 1945, Rivers led a party of 4 hunters up the mountain trails. As they returned to camp late that afternoon, Rivers walked ahead to retrieve a deer they had shot earlier. He rounded a bend in the trail and was never seen again. The other hunters waited, called out, then searched frantically as darkness fell. They found nothing. No tracks, no signs of struggle, no trace that Midi Rivers had ever existed beyond that bend in the path. The search that followed was massive by Vermont standards. Hundreds of volunteers combed the mountain for days. Bloodhounds lost his scent at the exact spot where he'd disappeared, as if he'd simply stepped out of existence. Aircraft flew grid patterns over the dense canopy. Nothing. Rivers had guided hunters through these woods for decades. He knew every trail, every stream, every dangerous drop. Yet he'd vanished as completely as if the mountain had opened up and swallowed him whole. A year later, 18-year-old Paula Weldon set out from Bennington College, for what she told friends would be a short hike up the long trail. She was an experienced walker, familiar with the area, wearing a bright red coat that should have made her visible from a distance. Several people saw her on the trail that December afternoon, heading toward Glastonbury Mountain. Then she, too, disappeared. The search for Paula Weldon became one of the largest in Vermont history. The FBI joined local and state police. Thousands of volunteers searched for weeks. Her red coat should have been impossible to miss among the bare winter trees, yet no trace was ever found. The disappearances continued with chilling regularity. James Tetford, a 68-year-old resident of the Bennington Soldiers' Home, vanished from a bus traveling through the area. Fellow passengers saw him sleeping in his seat as they entered the region around Glastonbury Mountain. When the bus reached its destination, Tetford was gone. His luggage remained on the overhead rack. His schedule and Timet sat on his seat. But James Tetford had disappeared from a moving vehicle without anyone noticing. 8-year-old Paul Jepson disappeared while playing in his family's truck near Glastonbury Mountain. His mother left him alone for less than an hour while she fed the family's pigs. When she returned, the boy was gone. Bloodhounds picked up his scent, leading directly toward the mountain, then lost it at a clearing where the trail forked in 3 directions. Despite intensive searches, no sign of Paul was ever discovered. The final documented disappearance occurred in October 1950, when Frida Langanger, an experienced hiker familiar with the area, became separated from her family during a camping trip. Unlike the others, her body was eventually found 7 months later in an area that had been thoroughly searched multiple times. The discovery raised more questions than it answered. The body showed no signs of violence or animal attack. How had experienced search teams missed it for so long in such a relatively small area? Local folklore had explanations that science couldn't accept. Old times spoke of a man-eating rock somewhere on Glastonbury Mountain, a stone formation that could somehow trap or consume the unwary. Others mentioned strange lights seen moving through the forest at night, or voices calling from empty woods. The Abenaki had their own stories about the mountain being a place where people could step between worlds, where the normal rules of existence didn't always apply. Modern theories attempt rational explanations. Some researchers point to the mountain's unique geology, suggesting underground cave systems could account for sudden disappearances. Others note the area's history of mental hospitals and industrial operations, proposing that disturbed individuals might have been responsible. The dense forest canopy and rugged terrain could easily hide evidence, they argue, and wild animals might have scattered remains beyond recovery. Yet none of these explanations account for the pattern. Why this specific location? Why this particular time period? And why did experienced outdoors people familiar with the dangers of Vermont's wilderness all vanish so completely that decades of searching have revealed virtually nothing? Standing on the slopes of Glastonbury Mountain today, especially as evening shadows lengthen between the trees, the silence feels heavy with possibility. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the underbrush makes you pause and listen. The trails wind through sections where cell phones lose signal and GPS devices sometimes give conflicting readings. There's something about the quality of light here. The way it filters through the canopy and creates pockets of deep shadow that seem to shift when you're not looking directly at them. The few who study these disappearances seriously have noticed other patterns that don't fit comfortable explanations. Electromagnetic anomalies recorded by hiking groups with GPS devices. Temperature drops of 10 or 15 degrees in specific clearings, even on warm summer days. And the silence, that complete absence of sound that visitors describe as unnatural, as if the mountain itself is holding its breath. Perhaps most unsettling are the accounts from those who've camped overnight in the area. They speak of waking to find their campfires extinguished, though no wind stirred the trees, of hearing footsteps circling their tents in perfect rhythm. never approaching, never retreating, of voices calling their names from directions that shifted as they listened, always just beyond the reach of their flashlight beams. The disappearances stopped as suddenly as they began. After 1950, the pattern broke. People still hike Glastonbury Mountain, and most return safely with nothing more than tired legs and good memories. But local guides remain cautious. They know the stories and they know the mountain. They watch for signs that something has shifted in the balance of that ancient place, that the four winds are stirring again. And if the woods can take people, what might the waters keep hidden beneath Lake Champlain's dark surface, where depths plunge to 400 ft and currents move in patterns that baffle hydrologists? Another mystery waits in the cold and silence. The lake stretches like an inland sea between Vermont and New York, its waters fed by mountain streams and ancient springs, but scattered across its bottom in depths where sunlight never penetrates, lie structures that challenge everything we think we know about who lived here and when. The first discovery came in 1985, when sonar equipment scanning for shipwrecks detected something unexpected. Instead of the wooden ribs of a colonial vessel or the iron hull of a steamboat, the instruments revealed geometric patterns on the lakebed, straight lines and right angles that nature doesn't create on its own. Circular formations too regular to be natural, and rising from the silted bottom what appeared to be walls. Divers who descended to investigate found themselves in an underwater landscape that defied easy explanation. Stone structures, some standing 20 ft high, arranged in patterns that suggested deliberate construction. Walls that formed rectangular enclosures, circular formations that might have been found for buildings or ceremonial spaces, and connecting them, pathways paved with flat stones running straight across the lakebed, as if someone had once walked these routes when the water was elsewhere. The stones themselves tell part of the story. They're not the rounded glacial boulders that litter the lake bottom elsewhere. These are angular blocks, some weighing several tons, fitted together with precision that speaks of planning and engineering skill. Many show clear signs of human modification, surfaces flattened and edges shaped for construction. Tool marks are still visible on some blocks, preserved by the cold water and lack of oxygen. Carbon dating of organic material found within the structures has yielded results that complicate the timeline. Some samples date to periods when Lake Champlain's water levels were dramatically different than today. Others suggest construction during the medieval period, when rising waters would have gradually submerged whatever civilization built these monuments. But the most intriguing samples push the dates back much further, to times when the lake was still forming, in the aftermath of retreating glaciers. Marine archaeologists working the site describe an eerie beauty in these underwater ruins. Your diving lights cut through water so clear it feels like floating in space, illuminating stone walls that emerge from the darkness like the ribs of some massive buried cathedral. Fish dart between the blocks, and aquatic plants have colonized the surfaces, but the fundamental architecture remains intact. In some areas, you can swim through doorways and along corridors that once knew footsteps and voices. The geometric precision of the layout suggests these weren't random settlements. The structures align with cardinal directions and astronomical events, much like the stone chambers scattered across Vermont's hills. Some formations create sightlines that, when projected to the surface, point towards significant landmarks on the surrounding shores. Others seem designed to frame celestial events as viewed from underwater, though what purpose such alignments might have served remains mysterious. Native American oral traditions offer one perspective on these submerged mysteries. Abenaki elders speak of a time before the great waters when their ancestors lived in villages along what are now the lake's deepest channels. These stories tell of sacred places built of stone ceremonial centers where the people gathered to mark the seasons and honor the spirits of the land when the waters rose. The stories say Some chose to let their sacred sites be claimed by the lake, rather than abandon them to decay. The submersion timeline adds credibility to these accounts. Lake Champlain's levels have fluctuated dramatically over the millennia, influenced by glacial melt, climate changes, and shifts in the St. Lawrence River outlet. During certain periods, vast areas now underwater would have been dry land, suitable for permanent settlement. As waters rose gradually over centuries, communities might have had time to relocate while leaving their stone monuments to be slowly claimed by the advancing lake. Modern theories attempt to explain the structures through more conventional means. Geologists point out that glacial activity can create surprisingly regular formations and that post-glacial settling might arrange stones in patterns that appear artificial. The regular spacing and geometric layouts, they argue, could result from natural processes we don't yet fully understand, combined with selective perception that sees intention in randomness. Yet the tool marks remain difficult to dismiss. The fitted joints, the astronomical alignments, the deliberate pathways connecting separate structures. These details resist explanation through natural forces alone. Even skeptical researchers acknowledge that human activity played some role in shaping these underwater sites, though they debate the scale and sophistication of that involvement. Standing on Lake Champlain's shore on a calm morning, when mist rises from the surface and the water reflects the surrounding mountains like a perfect mirror, it's difficult to imagine the complexity hidden beneath. The lake appears serene, eternal, unchanged, but knowing what lies below transforms the experience. Each ripple on the surface becomes a reminder of the stone corridors and circular chambers waiting in the depths, monuments to whoever walked this landscape when the water was elsewhere. The divers who first mapped these formations describe a haunting regularity to the underwater landscape. Swimming along what appears to be a main thoroughfare, your fins stirring silt that hasn't been disturbed in centuries. You encounter intersections where smaller pathways branch off at precise 90 degrees angles. The stones beneath, as if countless, are worn smooth. Feet once followed these routes when they lay beneath open sky instead of 40 feet of dark water. One formation particularly captures the imagination of researchers. A circular arrangement of standing stones, each about 8 feet tall, positioned around what might plaza have been a central or ceremonial space. The stones are spaced with mathematical precision, and when mapped from above, they align with the cardinal directions and several prominent peaks visible from the lake's surface. If these alignments were intentional, they suggest knowledge of both astronomy and surveying that would have required sophisticated planning. But it's the smaller details that make these ruins feel most human. Tool marks are still visible on many stones, preserved by the lake's cold, oxygen-poor depths. Some blocks show evidence of modification that goes beyond simple shaping. Channels carved into surfaces might have guided water flow or held wooden beams. Circular depressions could have anchored posts or held ceremonial objects. These aren't the random scratches of geological processes. They're the deliberate marks of craftsmen working with purpose and skill. The organic remains found within the structures tell their own story. Charcoal fragments suggest fires once burned here, though whether for warmth, cooking, or ceremony remains unclear. Pollen samples trapped in the sediment reveal the plant communities that existed when the structures were built, painting a picture of a landscape that would have supported permanent settlement, and scattered among the stones. Archaeologists have recovered tools and pottery fragments that span centuries, suggesting these sites remained important long after their original builders vanished. Local maritime historians point out that Lake Champlain has always been a corridor for travel and trade. Before European contact, indigenous peoples used the lake as a highway connecting communities from the St. Lawrence River to the Hudson Valley. The underwater structures might represent waypoints along these ancient routes, places where travelers could rest, trade, or conduct ceremonies before continuing their journeys. As water levels rose over the centuries, these important sites would have been gradually claimed by the advancing lake. The timing of the submersion adds weight to this theory. Geological evidence suggests that Lake Champlain's levels were significantly lower during the medieval warm period, roughly 900 to 300 AD. During this time, areas now under 20 or 30 ft of water would have been dry land suitable for construction. As the climate cooled and glacial melt increased water levels, communities would have had generations to relocate while their stone monuments slowly disappeared beneath the surface. Yet questions persist about the sophistication of the engineering involved. Moving multi-ton blocks across the lake bed, even when it was dry land, would have required organizational skills and mechanical knowledge that archaeologists don't typically associate with pre-Columbian northeastern cultures. The precision of the alignments, the complexity of the layout, scale of some. The SH formations suggest a level of social organization and technical capability that challenges conventional timelines. Standing on the ferry that crosses Lake Champlain between Vermont and New York, watching the wake spread across water that mirrors the surrounding mountains, it's impossible not to wonder what lies directly beneath. The lake appears timeless, but knowing about the stone corridors and ceremonial circles hidden in its depths changes everything. Each mile of seemingly empty water becomes a potential archaeological site. Each deep section a possible repository of secrets waiting to be explored. The mystery deepens when you consider that Lake Champlain's underwater structures aren't unique. Similar formations have been discovered in other deep lakes across the Northeast, always in areas where water levels have fluctuated dramatically over geological time. This suggests a pattern, a network of sites connected by waterways and shared cultural knowledge that we're only beginning to understand. Modern technology continues to reveal new aspects of these submerged mysteries. Side-scan sonar has identified additional formations in areas previously thought empty. Underwater photography captures details that suggest even more complex construction than originally believed. And as diving techniques improve, researchers are able to spend more time exploring these sites, mapping their layouts, and recovering artifacts that might finally provide definitive answers about who built them and why. But perhaps the most intriguing discovery isn't a structure at all. In the deepest sections of the lake, where the stone formations are most elaborate, divers report an unusual phenomenon. The water itself seems different, clearer somehow, with visibility that extends far beyond what should be possible at such depths. Some describe it as swimming through liquid crystal, where their lights illuminate the ruins with an almost ethereal clarity. These observations might have scientific explanations related to mineral content, temperature gradients, or unique ecological conditions in the lake's deepest waters. But for those who've experienced it firsthand, diving among Vermont's underwater monuments feels like entering a different world entirely. A place where time moves differently, where the boundary between past and present becomes as fluid as the water itself. As autumn deepens across Vermont and the first snows dust the peaks surrounding Lake Champlain, the mystery of these submerged ruins takes on new dimensions. The contrast between the familiar world above the waterline and the alien landscape below becomes more stark. Ice will soon lock the surface, sealing away the underwater monuments for another winter, preserving them in cold and darkness as they've been preserved for centuries. But mysteries have a way of surfacing when least expected, and Vermont's ancient secrets refuse to stay buried. Whether hidden in hillside chambers, scattered through vanished forests, or resting beneath dark waters, they continue to whisper questions that our modern world struggles to answer. The stones remember even when we forget. The land holds its stories even when we stop listening. And in a state where the past and present intersect at every turn, where morning mist can transform a familiar landscape into something strange, perhaps that's exactly as it should be. Some secrets are meant to be pondered rather than solved, experienced rather than explained. The ancient mysteries of Vermont wait patiently in their hiding places, content to let us wonder. Patterns emerge across Vermont's ancient landscape, like threads in a tapestry we've forgotten how to read. Stone chambers that frame the solstice sun with impossible precision. Forests where experienced guides vanish without a trace. Underwater monuments that shouldn't exist, built when the lake was elsewhere by hands we can't identify. Each mystery stands alone, yet something connects them all. Perhaps it's the way they resist our modern need for neat explanations. The chambers could be colonial root cellars, but why the astronomical alignments? The disappearances might have rational causes, but why that specific mountain, that particular span of years? The lake ruins could be natural formations. But what about the tool marks, the deliberate pathways, the mathematical precision of their layout? Or perhaps the connection is deeper, woven into Vermont itself. A landscape where morning mist transforms the familiar into the impossible. Where every stone wall might hide something older, where the boundary between what we know and what we wonder grows thin as evening shadows. These mysteries don't demand solutions. They ask us to remember that the world still holds secrets, that some questions matter more than their answers. Standing anywhere in Vermont, where the ancient and modern worlds intersect, you feel it. The weight of stories untold, the presence of hands that shaped stone and marked time before our time began. Whether built by forgotten civilizations, ancestral peoples, or forces we haven't learned to recognize, these mysteries endure because they speak to something deeper than curiosity. They remind us that we're not the first to walk this land, and we won't be the last to wonder what came before. The stones remember even when we forget. The mountains keep their secrets even as we search for answers. And maybe that's exactly as it should be. Some mysteries are meant to be felt rather than solved, experienced rather than explained. Vermont's ancient secrets wait patiently in their hiding places, content to let us wonder, knowing that wonder itself might be the point. What do you think these mysteries really represent? Drop your theory below. And if you want to explore more unsolved ancient secrets, hit that subscribe button. The next chapter is waiting.